It's a good question, actually, Wooly, because there certainly was a lot of it done years ago. It was the old adage, test the spring and the stick. You would do it, obviously, when you get a new hurley, because you just needed to know that you did have that spring in it. But
why would you need a spring in it?
Because we didn't. It fairly set your hands on fire if you pull.
Oh, right.
I'm not finished yet. It took me a long time to get here.
Both players have spoken with each other.
So we're back for the hurling show, lads. No more big ball, no more nonsense talk, lads. So that's it. So we can just talk hurling here, and we're absolutely spoiled for choice. Hurling fans are this weekend. I was giving out about this on the football show. So there's 3 hurling games on this weekend on TV, only 1 football game. And even though the Football League this year is incredibly important because there's going to be a tier 2, so Division 2 and Division 3 teams want to stay up and they want to go up, and none of them want to go down. So there's more of a championship feel about the Football League. Again, this sounds like Groundhog Year, Cheddar. I'll start with you. This league, for me, I'm looking at it going, meh. Westmeath are going down out of Division 1. And in Division 2, do teams really care about a league when they have another league coming after that? That's the way I'm looking at it again this year.
Well, I think that the league format last year would have been better for developing counties. I think there's no doubt about that. Look, in the last, I suppose, 10 or 15 years, there was a time, certainly in the 70s and the 80s, when the league mattered. It was certainly regarded as a separate competition that everybody wanted to win. I don't think it's anything really less now in the sense of actually wanting to win, Wooly.
Would it be more as nice to win rather than this?
I think it is. I think teams use it for different reasons now. It's not that they don't want to go out and win matches. There's a lot of variables that go on now at this time of the league. Where are they? Where's the team in their development curve? Are they trying to settle a team? Are they trying to find a method to play? How many injuries do they have? Is it a new management? Fitzgibbon is going to eat into it, a view in a lot of players in the Fitzgibbon, because if you lose the first game or two, look, you might have a different view then of what you want to get out of the league and that. But nonetheless, it's a very, very, very important competition, a hugely important competition in terms of preparation for the championship. And if you just look at that and you look at where Waterford are in the Munster Championship, they could very well be out of it in the middle of May. Dublin could very well be out of the Leinster Championship in the middle of May. So your preparation and what you want to get out of it and get a settled team with your best players in the right positions, playing the brand of hurling that you want to play with a number of game plans under your belt that you're going to be able to take on these teams is hugely important. So the importance of the league to preparation for the championship and to the importance for those counties is no less than it was back then, except the result may not be as important now maybe as it was a number of years ago.
That's the thing. So as more of a feel of a warm-up competition, Brian, there's no quarter-finals this year. I meant to mention that the games on this weekend are Tipperary Limerick's on air on Saturday, then Waterford Cork is the live game on TG Caher, and Kilkenny Dublin is the deferred game. So 3 games, no quarter-finals this year, Brian. There is that feel that they just scrap the January competitions and call the league what it is. It's a warm-up competition for the championship.
Yeah, and I'd actually like that we would go back to maybe a league that we had in around 2009 and 2010, where we actually had 16 teams. So there was a Division 1, I suppose, at the top 8, and then Division 2 had the next 8. You could mix them if they want to tweak around with it again, but I actually thought the league worked really well that way. And I would do that, and I would scrap those warm-up interprovincial competitions, whatever they are, the Walsh Cup or the Waterford Crystal, and have a maybe a longer league rather than 5 matches. I thought the league was quite good then. It was quite competitive. The teams that were down in Division 2 certainly wanted to get up to Division 1, but it also, I suppose, had the purpose of what the league has always been, as Cheddar's alluded to there, is that it was an opportunity for managers to try out players and try systems, and essentially at the end of the day, I think that's always what the league has been. It's always been a warm up towards the championship. I suppose the big thing here is the fact that the championship has turned into a league as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. Jeez, I don't know if it's always been a warm up. I remember finals with Tipperary and Kilkenny, and
but when you get to the finals, it's different. Everyone wants to win the final and semi-final.
I get that, but I remember,
even in the group stages, Tipperary and Limerick now, there will be no quarter asked nor given on Saturday, and both teams will go out to win it. But it doesn't mean both managers are going to put out their first 15. So it depends what the management is looking in terms of the longer term picture there. And obviously Cheddar has been in that position more than I have, and he'll definitely attest to that. But when the ball is thrown in, both teams want to win. I've no doubt about that.
Here's last year's league, just so that people, I don't want to run down the league too, because I want people to listen to the show here. But at the same time, you have to be honest about it. Like Kilkenny last year were in a relegation match against Cork, and they made the All Ireland final. Dublin topped the group and beat Tip in the quarter final away, and they lost to Laois in the championship. Tip lost to Dublin in the quarter final at home and won the All Ireland. And Waterford made the league final and had a woeful championship. So the idea that we would ever be analysing teams, or they're not looking very good, that's out of the question during the league, Cheddar.
But I don't think that, though, Wooly, I think that's way too simplistic. There's a number of reasons why that's the case. You simply couldn't say that Brian Cody took any match last year easy and just ended up where he did. That hasn't been his form in 20 years. So he wasn't going to start last year. And when you quote Kilkenny. And when you look at the reasons for that, he's maybe in the very same position this year. He was missing all of the Ballyhale players. He may be missing Tullaroan players in the next couple of weeks. And you could lose a couple of matches and be in the wrong place at the wrong time and suddenly end up in a relegation and get them all back. And that's the real reason why these things happen. So I think I just go back to my earlier point. I think there's a lot of variables about results, particularly in the earlier stages of the league, which might actually then change your mind about what you want to do and what you want to find out in that. You certainly look, how else are you going to find out about players? How else are you going to I suppose rehearse the game plan that you want to use, or maybe their method of hurling? And there's a number, I think this year is going to be very, very interesting. We might talk about it later on. There's going to be a number of counties that are probably going to have to look at changing things up a little bit, because not necessarily that teams have found them out, but in a sense they have. So I don't think it is that hugely different. I don't know any manager that would go out and deliberately throw a game or lose a game. It's it would be a terrible psychological position to put any team into. But I think there's a number of reasons why you end up maybe with the performances that you'd like it to be a little bit different. And Brian makes the point that the championship is now a league, and is it really? It's dog eat dog in both provinces, probably to an extent. And I've just quoted Munster and Leinster, two teams that want to move on. Waterford want to move up with new management. Dublin want to go to a different place, certainly a different place than they were last year. And if they come into the championship undercooked and they haven't learned a lot about themselves and their team and all of that, well, they're going to have the same result again this year. Yeah,
I think maybe that there's no manager would ever say, lads, we don't want to win this one, but managers could run the shite out of them on the Thursday night. They could.
I know, Willie. Look, that's not really the case.
Are they not trying to get real?
Well, you might as well tell your players that you're trying to throw the match. These are all intelligent people. They know you're after doing a 10k run on the Saturday night and you're going out to play on the Sunday. So you might as well tell them, look, lads, we're throwing a match. I don't think it works like that.
Do managers not use this time of the year to get loads of kind of fitness work done?
No, I was going to make that point. You're in cycles of your training, and the conditioning people will advise you where to go here, and you may very well be in the middle of a cycle on that. You won't change that, but you won't deliberately go out and run the hell out of them the night before or the morning. I often see that whereby somebody said, I heard that such a team had put in a savage physical session on the Sunday morning and went out to play the match. I'd be amazed at this level or at that level. Considering the importance of the team and that, you might as well tell your players, lads, look, we're throwing the match here. So that's what you're doing.
Yeah, pretty much. So there's loads of new managers, Brian. It's a little bit unprecedented, the amount of new managers in Division 1A and 1B, and then there's one in 2. Obviously the big one in 2A is Offaly. Michael Fennelly, Johnny Kelly looks like a great ticket. So we've Kieran Kingston's back with Cork. We have Shane O'Neill is in with Galway. Brian Lohan in with Clare. Liam Cahill, who I don't know anything about Liam Cahill other than managing the Tip under-21s and winning against the odds. I think he kind of impresses me, the stuff I read from him. Michael Fennelly, then I mentioned. Westmeath have a new manager who's Shane O'Brien from Coola. He won an under-21 All-Ireland with Westmeath. So for maybe while I'm talking down the league a little bit, Brian, when there's loads of new managers, that adds a bit of spice to it, because obviously they don't want to get off to a start and immediately put themselves under pressure, while internally they might say, lads, no panic. Local press and media will say, geez, they will start drawing conclusions when they shouldn't.
100%. I think they'll be chasing victories as quick as possible. And again, coming back to championship now, the fact that it's a home and away agreement, every team is setting out their stall. They're trying to make their home grounds a fortress. How many times have we heard that? over the last couple of years, and how hard it is to go to, say, Parnell Park or Ennis Cusick Park and so on. So they're trying to make sure of all games that the home games are crucial and you have to win those games. Shane O'Neill there with Galway, even he'd be disappointed even to lose that game last week against Wexford in the World Cup final. They had to win of it and Wexford just pipped him at the post. But again, something similar as what you're talking about, he'll be trying to set out his stall. Even it's a difficult year, or year two for Liam Sheedy, because Tipperary haven't done their back-to-back, and there's a lot of younger players really chomping at the bit now, trying to get in. They've won an under-21 championship 2 years ago under Liam Cahill, won under 20 last year. So trying to keep all those players happy as well as your more seasoned players, and trying to make sure that they get game time, and obviously they're not long back off their team holiday as well. So you're dead right, there's a lot of kind of factors at play here. But again, I'd have to reiterate what Cheddar's saying. I think once that whistle's blown, I think management will be trying to win those games all out.
Does it take a very confident manager, Cheddar, to come in your first year with a team, especially a team like Galway? Like, say, take Shane O'Neill for an example, right? I know all the Galway players, pretty much. I'm not a hurling man. You know their team, and you wouldn't probably be able to pick 11 of them or 12 of them. So, is he going in trying to blank that out of his head and go, this is not a good start if I have already got this in my, in my head? How long does he go in with a blank canvas, or how easy is that to go in with a blank canvas with a team that the whole country knows?
Look, I suppose he does and he doesn't. Wooly, look, he'll have a clear way that he thinks the team should play, based probably on what he's seen him. Nobody's going to go into a county and not know the things that drive the team and the way they play, and the improvements that he thinks he can bring to it. And some of that will be a little bit maybe discussions with players, even though players mightn't think that the manager is talking to them about these things, but he is. So I think anybody going in, particularly going into Galway or any of these top teams, if they don't have a clear vision about where they think the team is going to go, and that they might tweak it and change it a little bit based on what they learn when they go into the counties, but they certainly would have a clear vision about where the team would go. So I think that there's not a huge amount of learning in that sense. There is a huge amount of learning about players and what drives them and individuals and all of those type of things. There is a lot to do with that. But I think just on the upper level, in terms of the way the team should play and to where he thinks that team can move to based on the resources that's available to them, I think you would have a pretty clear vision going into a county. And to be honest with you, a county board probably shouldn't appoint you if you didn't have that.
Right, okay. Shane O'Neill said, Brian, he said, there'll need to be some sort of bedding in period. We need to get to know each other as people as much as hurling people. What our attributes are from a hurling point of view, but also from our personalities. And I was just thinking, in the modern game, like I know from going up to Portlaoise training, I don't hang around in the dressing room. I go up in my gear and I just bring a pair of bloody Crocs or whatever, and I drive home, leave them in the dressing room. I don't hang around. Wonder when teams get to know each other, personalities, from a manager point of view. I'll ask you, Cheddar, on this one as well. Like, when does this happen? Or is this the old traditional thing of everybody going out for a pint and getting boxed off with a couple of different lads and getting to know them? Or has that gone out of intercounty? How does this work, I wonder, Brian?
Yeah, well, look, I think intercounty is totally different from club, and as well, you have to bear in mind that you're and I'm probably similar enough to you, but you're at a different stage in your life where you've maybe kids at home and you're trying to rush out and get home as quick as you can. Whereas intercounty now, most players are there about an hour before training.
True.
Whether it's physio or first touch or video analysis, or there's opportunities to meet the manager or management team and have those one-on-one conversations. Something similar afterwards. Players seem to be, and I've seen that you seem to be in no rush to go home. You'll be there having a meal together and maybe video analysis. So there's an awful lot more opportunities outside of the training, the 90 minutes or whatever, for management to have these meetings. And it's well known and well documented that management do have those one-to-one meetings with players. That kind of has moved on a huge amount from that perspective. I think Shane O'Neill is a good fit for Galway in that, obviously being over in the Pierceig, they were on a hurling style team. They didn't play, say, maybe a sweeper, so I think that would fit in well with the Galway setup. So I think it'll be a good transition from him. I think the couple of managers that might be under pressure would be the likes of Brian Lohan and even Liam Cahill in Waterford, where they're going into counties that have the hangover of a hugely structured setup, be it Derek McGrath with Waterford, and we've seen how Pádraig Fannin, the fallout of that he had last year, and obviously the same with with Clare, with the joint management there, and Davy Fitz obviously. So I think those two managers in particular have a they have a lot of hard decisions probably to make, and maybe to change mindsets. I think that'll be tough for them in particular.
Yeah, they probably do. And Brian Lohan was a big critic of other managers in Clare. I think he might have wrote for a local paper. Quickly, Cheddar, how did you get to know the James Stevens lads? Like, I mean, do you find that important to get to know the personalities as well?
Absolutely crucial. And it's different from county to county, and it's different where teams are in their performance curve and all of that. Look, this is my view. I think, look, you're managing people. And the coach, everybody's different roles here. Your job really, you're managing people. You need to get to know people. You need to, first of all, and look, some people have different ways of doing things. There's no one perfect fit for all here. But I think you do need to create a sort of an open communications medium between management and players. I think that's the first thing. And I think doing that, one-to-one with players. And you've got to recognise as well that, some players are very, very quick coming forward with their thoughts and some aren't. And you've got to note all of those things. And I suppose when you're looking at teams that are below the top 7 or 8, it's a very, very different man management you've got to have there, and you've got to really, really get to know players, what drives them, what motivates them, what they're doing work wise, absolutely everything, minute stuff about them, because you don't know the hurdles that's holding them back. It's not just good enough to say, you're all right, you're going to Hurl County, you're going to play in a Leinster final or play in an All Ireland. It may not happen. So there's completely different motivation factors going on for players, and you've got to know that, and you've equally got to know. I don't have the experience of managing the top 3 or 4 teams, but I would think there's probably, you need to know that as well, that you kind of take your finger off the pulse of, look, you are playing for Cork or Tipperary or Kilkenny or Galway or whatever, and you have a chance of winning an All-Ireland. You can't back away from that either. So it's having that hard edge, and yet at the same time having the arm around the shoulder with players and getting that mix right and not getting it wrong, because if you get it wrong, you never get it back. And I think Brian makes a point there. I mean, there's an old saying, you've only ever one chance of making a first impression, and that's the first night you land in the dressing room. And, it's really, really important that you get right on day one and that you stay right on that track. And I think having an open sort of communications medium with players is really, really important. Maybe not for all teams, but certainly for a lot of teams.
I don't remember. Brian, do you remember a manager ever asking you, were you happy in your life, or were you happy in your job, or, are you under pressure? Were you ever? I played intercounty up until 2011. I was never asked one dicky bird. Well, not one dicky bird.
You were probably one of the ones that looked happy though, Wooly. They probably didn't need to ask you that.
Maybe they could say, why are you always messing? Why are you acting up? Why are you acting up? I needed a psychologist, maybe, Cheddar. That was it. How did you do, Brian? Like, I mean, I know this is new, and I think it's a great development. Like, I mean, but getting to know players, that was never a thing in my time. Like, I mean, you get to know you get to know players as players.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to have really good club managers. So like I had the likes of Ken Hogan and Johnny Kelly now, and obviously they're well known in the hurling terms. Like, they were excellent at that side of things too, really getting to know players off the field. Ken in particular had a brilliant skill at it, and getting to know players' families, and I always say, like, he kept the wives and girlfriends happy, and that was really important, because he never had an issue with you coming to training, etc. So it's good management to know that. And I suppose from my perspective, obviously I'm a teacher and I'm involved in coaching a lot of teams as well, and Cheddar makes a very, very valid point. Knowing when to put the arm around a guy, putting it around the shoulder, or knowing when you can actually drive a fella through maybe bollocking him a little bit, and knowing the difference in personalities. And obviously that takes time. And the other of it, I think Cheddar makes a fantastic point. We look at Cody and everyone talks about how much he rules with an iron fist, but that wouldn't work in Offaly or Laois, because to a point, because sometimes the players, they're not replaceable to an point, and there's that happy medium that you're trying to work within, and maybe a guy will get away with a little bit more for a while, until it becomes untenable that his position on the panel isn't actually possible unless he's some way towards the line. So there's definitely different strokes for different folks.
Well, that's a good point about Eddie Brennan and Laois, Cheddar, because Brian Cody probably wouldn't go back near lads that wouldn't come in the year before. You know what I mean? You'd get a chance to go in, and that would be it. Eddie's gone back to the lads that didn't want to come in last year, and amazingly with Laois, and disappointingly, after the year they had, the lads, other than Kieran McAvoy from Portlaoise, who didn't go in last year, he's come back in this year. None of the other fellas that they wanted to come back in again this year. I was very surprised when I read that.
First of all, you got to give Brian Cody. Brian's in a different position here. There's nobody is saying that if Brian wasn't over Laois and wasn't over Carlow or Westmeath, that he would adapt a different management.
Yeah. He's dealing with what he's dealing with.
He's dealing with what he's dealing. And that's the point I'm sort of making. You really need to know what's in front of you and what you're managing. It's not just coming in and doing what you think is right. You need to step back, figure out everything first before you make any sort of decisions on these things, because you could very well make the wrong one. And I'll just answer your point on that. Look, Brian has alluded to it here. It is a very, very different role in these counties, because the carrot is very, very different. And I suppose that's the point I'm making. And the real issue here is that the volume of technically gifted players, and I'm just talking my own county, is very, very different than it is in Kilkenny or Tipperary or Cork or some of these. And so if you miss one or two players, the loss is huge. I mean, you look at Dublin, missed their wing back, went off for a year there, wing back there a couple of years ago. They went on and won an All-Ireland. So they clearly didn't miss him, even though he was the best Dublin player again the following year when he came back. Jack McCaffrey, his name slipped my mind there. So it's just that when you miss 2 or 3 players in your own county, because the volume of the players that can play and that can commit at this level is huge, and you simply cannot just tar them with a brush like that and just say we had a good year last year, because that's not what drives a lot of the people here. And there may be a huge amount of hurdles in their way. You just take, for example, somebody's 25, 26 and he starts to build his own house. You are now training 6-7 days a week. It's a complete life commitment here to the team and to hurling. And he's doing this, and he's probably maybe able to do a little bit of work himself, or he needs to work the extra hours to pay for the tradesman to build his house or whatever the case may be, or he may change jobs and it's not easy. His new management had never heard about hurling and not giving him the time off. So there's an awful lot of reasons here that you need to get in behind, and you need to talk to the players, you need to talk to everybody. We're going back to that point, Wooly. You were talking to that person's work management team to figure out how you're going to get them released and what needs to get done to release your players. It's that level. It's a very, very different level than the Kilkennys or any of these counties. Yeah. For you to really ensure that you have all your players, and you need them all to be able to perform at this level. Yeah, no, it is. It's definitely an interesting one. There's been a lot of talk in football circles about how many players have been not committing to panels, Brian, and it hasn't so much been a topic of conversation in hurling. But I'm reading Daniel Carney, who's opted out of Cork this year, Peter Duggan, who's opted out of Clare to go travelling, Johnny Glynn's not coming back this year, Shane Bennett's opted out of Waterford again, Chav Fitz is going travelling in Laois, Philip O'Matney has retired at 28. Do you know what I mean? Like, do we need to read into this from a hurling perspective as well, that players just simply in their lives don't have the time to commit to what's being asked of them? I wouldn't read too much into it, being honest. Again, all those have to be taken on an individual case-by-case basis, and what's going on. Cheddar's kind of said it there, whether it's job or travelling or family or relationship, situations, finishing college, maybe feeling they want to go away for a year. So we have to remember sometimes that this is a hobby. Okay, it's a high-stakes hobby, but it is ultimately a hobby. And, people... sometimes it suits them, sometimes it doesn't commit, and we can be very and I've been guilty of this myself, we can be very quick to give out about players not committing and so on and so forth. We've no right or to enforce that on them, whether they're good enough or not. Like, there's no one holding a gun to their head that they have to play inter-county hurling. It doesn't pay the bills at the end of the day, and obviously the same with the football. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I think players have come and go over the years. Maybe it just happens that there's 5 or 6 of them all here at the one particular time. And again, as I said, I wouldn't read too much into that. I see it from both sides, Cheddar, because I left Laois lots of times and I spent 5 summers in America and I did all that kind of thing. And at the time I was a little bit like, how dare you even tell me what to do with my life, and I'm not contracted. And now as a fan, I look at lads not committing and I'm like, for God's sake, and I'm half tick with them, and it's like I've completely not taken my own advice back then. It's hard. I can see both sides. I can see why supporters obviously are very disappointed. A team that goes well one year and then loses 3 players and you're back, scratching it. It's understandable from both sides. I don't think there's anybody necessarily in the wrong there. I think you have captured it well, Willie. Look, you've got to look at it from the player's perspective, I think. And look, fruitcakes like myself would be absolutely raging that a player doesn't go, fucking eyes out going for something like this when you realise maybe what's there. But people are different. And I think you got to look at that. And just by the way, Charlie Dwyer will be delighted to be compared to Cha Fitz. But anyway,
what did I say, Chad Dwyer? Did I?
Jeez, you said
Anyway.
Fitz, yeah.
I have Chad Dwyer written down here.
Anyway, no, and I mean, look at the thing about it is the Wooly. There's a sort of a side point to this. Just the players that you mentioned. Some of the players are sort of key losses to those teams. Daniel Carney was that third midfielder in the previous game plan that Cork played. Peter
Big
Duggan,
time, yeah.
Very, very important. And they may not have another player to play that way. And Peter Duggan would have been a primary possession winner in the air and puckouts and all of that. And definitely Johnny Glynn was. So they are serious losses. But I think the first thing you got to look at isn't the player, and not necessarily look at it. How can we help you out? Where are you going? I think we just need to get closer to players and support them more, and not necessarily players. That's everybody. Why not look out for each other here rather than castigating people for not playing? And look, Jack McCaffrey's a very, very good case here. He look what he's done for Dublin since. You could very well create a very negative and pessimistic atmosphere around the player just because he went to tour the world or something like that. And if you get in behind that, you will always find that this is the usual one. We'll say at the minute, somebody's taking time out to go to Australia or New Zealand, wherever they're going. And if you look at it, all their friends have probably done it as well.
Yeah.
They're just simply doing what their own age group is doing. And you just got to recognise that and move on. But I just go back to that point, and I think Brian would back me up in that. It's just a much bigger hit on some of the counties that's in the middle grouping that's trying to climb the ladder here.
Yeah, no, exactly. We'll leave it on a bit of good news anyways, because the Bonner Mar's back in business. So Shane McCallan was at the Alliance League launch, and he was saying, thankfully I have no experience of that injury, but all I know is Bonner is in the shape of his life and he's coming back with great strength. It was never going to be in doubt really, because he's that type of guy, and when he puts his mind to something like his recovery to his training, he'll always be trying to better himself and get back stronger than it ever was. So look, listen, let's leave the top of the show on a good note. The Bonner's back.
Just before you go off of that, well, isn't it amazing that we haven't actually nobody seems to have mentioned that Tip won in All Ireland without the Bonner.
Yeah.
What a bloody warrior. You would have said, I would have said, earlier on in the year, God, I'm not so sure that forward line will win without him, and they did.
Yeah.
But it's brilliant to see him back. I think everybody just loves the guy. Everybody loves that type of player that just, he's a selfless player, as I said before, plays for the team, no ego whatsoever, tough as nails. I think everybody loves that type of player, and it's brilliant to see him back.
Yeah, Brian, I'll give you one word on Bonner, because I hear your school bell going there. I know we're going to have to leave you there now.
Have to run. The youth, I'm back.
Do you want a word? Do you want a word on Bonner, or do you have to get out of there?
No, Bonner. No, just very quickly. Obviously, Bonner. Delighted for him, because he's one of the real good guys, and you always hear the Tipperary players talk about him. And there's such superstars that Tipperary have had, but they still talk about Bonner. And he's so selfless in his play and everything that he brings, and as I said, real honest guy. So, I think everyone on the Tip panel, I think he would have been a big part of the motivating factor for last year. To try and make sure that they won it for Bonner when he wasn't available. So, it's good to see him back. And still, amazingly, no better man to work his way back onto that six, probably, but he'll get it hard, because there's huge competition for places in Tipperary at the moment.
Okay, brilliant stuff, Brian. We'll let you go there. We'll continue on here without you. Actually, Cheddar, there's one more talking point I wanted to ask you before we left, and this just popped into my head talking with Damien Hayes on Monday, and this was about bending the old tradition of bending the hurl. Now, I'm sure you've done it when it usually happened when you'd be taking a sideline, and I was saying to Damien, because we're talking on the back of Jerry Kelly's unbelievable sideline, and it just popped into my head why players don't bend the hurl anymore, and why the hell players back in the 80s and 90s used to bend the shite out of the hurl on both sides. Damien says all you're doing is weakening the hurl. You're actually doing of no benefit whatsoever, and I'm just wondering, from your era, why did you think you were doing so? What did you think you were doing?
It's a good question, actually, Wooly, because there certainly was a lot of it done years ago. It was the old adage, test the spring and the stick. You would do it, obviously, when you get a new hurley, because you just needed to know that you did have that spring in it. But
why would you need a spring in it?
Because we didn't, it fairly set your hands on fire if you
Oh,
pull.
right,
You would have some timber, you would have some that would be just a board.
Right.
And you would clash with another hurling, the sting would go up your hands. So that sort of takes that out of it to an extent. Not totally, but to an extent. And look, if you just wouldn't strike the ball well in that, you just wouldn't have the sweet spot in your hurley that you would have in that.
Okay.
But to go back to the point, I don't know. I think it's maybe habit more than anything else, Wooly. Something that you had done when you were a kid or something like that. And I might just go back to that point in a second. Or maybe some people think that they'll get a better curve on the boss of the hurley to take a cut like that. But I'll tell you something. There's going to be an awful lot of kids around Borrisoleigh in the next couple of months. They'll be all testing their hurley and that sort of thing. And look, it may be very well just habitual that when you start off like that, you just keep doing like that. I might just tell a funny one on that one. I played a little bit of that whole Mullickers game that you'd be always talking about, and you'd be talking about, you'd be raving about there, Wooly, in my earlier career. And some people might remember a Meath full back called Jack Quinn. He used to take kickouts off the ground, obviously, in those years. And he used to do a little skip before they came to it, and I thought that was great. I thought it steadied you up and all of that. Sure, it had absolutely nothing to do with it. I said it was just a habit that Jack Quinn used. Some of the older listeners might remember it, and of course I copied that. And it takes a while to get out of that habit, actually, now that I think of it. So I think the engineers would say it probably does weaken the hurley. I think Brian is right, but I'd say it's just habit. People just do it out of habit.
But you don't see them doing it anymore. That was the point I'm making.
I agree with you. Yeah.
So I don't know whether that message has been sent down or is just I don't know. Maybe the hurley maker will tell you don't need. That's tested now. There's enough given that you don't need to be.
I think so. Look, when you buy a hurley, like you do an awful lot of tests on it, even the balance on it, Wooly. The centre balance on it. You need to know that that's spot on. Look, I think you asked me this question last year. I remember when we were all younger, we'd drill little holes in the bottom and put lead into the bottom of it, cross the lead in it and put the bands over them just to get the weight right. And you might like a stick and you'd hold on to that for life, and you try and replicate that the whole time. I suppose the good players never broke sticks, but the fellas like myself probably went through a fair few of them in our time. There's one other little thing of really interest here, Wooly.
You'd be doing well playing hurling against Camrus in the 80s, going through the whole career.
You always draw that up, and I can tell you there's going to be a couple of Camrus lads that meet you somewhere along the way, Wooly, and they'll drive that home. One other little funny thing, what's of more interest to me is actually the routine on frees, Wooly. I think if you look at Decky Dalton for Father Niels on Saturday night, I suppose he just keeps spinning the hurley in his hand before he takes the free.
Right.
And if you look at Shane Walsh, I think for Tullaroan, he's a different approach to the free. He sort of stands behind the free as such. And if you look at Enda Rowland, has a different approach again. That's a little different because certainly, going back a number of years ago, people would have started, you would have faced up to the ball at the side and took the strike like that. And I'm surprised by some of them, because I would think that Declan's approach of spinning the hurley, it mightn't actually help you. All of the golf people and all of the, you look at what Ronan Agar has spoken a lot about this. Your routine, practice your routine, stick with it, stay with it, and that's what free takers do. I'm just surprised by some of them. There seems to be a bit of a change in footwork and in routine in the last couple of years.
Right, it's an interesting one, that spinning the hurl. I haven't seen him doing that. You see tennis players doing that. They're about to return a serve coming at 150 miles an hour, and they're spinning the racket. How would they actually have it back exactly the right place to take their...
That's exactly what I'm surprised about. And that's interesting that you draw that example, Willie, because look, they're coached to the nth degree, and I'm just surprised that somebody hasn't said, hold on a second now, are you going to get it exactly where you want it to strike back?
I'd rather have it exactly before.
I would have thought so. I would have thought so, but obviously.
Okay. Listen, we'll do a show on tennis next week, Cheddar. We'll come back in part 2. We'll take a look at one game, which is Tipperary and Limerick. Yeah, so the big one, like I was mentioning in 1A, is Tipperary Limerick. This is obviously All-Ireland champions versus the team everybody thought would win the All-Ireland last year, and obviously on the back of Limerick hammering Tipperary in the Munster final. Like, while I did make the point that the league doesn't mean too much, and there's more important league coming up early in the season, knowing what Liam Sheedy's like and knowing the bit of controversy Limerick have come through and not making the All-Ireland final, there might be a little bit of spice to this one.
I think there'll always be spice between Tipperary and Limerick, regardless of where it's played or what it is, more particularly when it's hurling. Look, I think it's a very, very interesting game. one might say, well, look, Tip need to stop the rot here against Limerick, and bear in mind, I think the championship they're playing them in the Gaelic grounds again this year. But I don't think that's the case in this instance. Look, they're all Ireland champions, but I think, look, people would say that when you have the foot on the throat of somebody, you have to fight twice as hard then to try and shake that off. And Tip maybe need to shake Limerick off. I think this might arrive in a different way. I think Tipperary will try some players. I mentioned a couple of times about Mark Hewell last year. There's a number of young players that Brian has mentioned earlier on there that's going to try and get into the team. So they are going to be going at it hammer and tongs to try. You're only going to get maybe a couple of chances here to impress Liam Sheedy to grab a place in the team. And where is a better place to do it than against maybe your biggest opponents in the next year, in this year's championship. So I think what's much more interesting for me, I think Tipperary may not change a huge amount what they're doing. They may have maybe different personnel here and there, and obviously Banner coming into that. I think they're well on the journey about where they want to be, and I don't think they'll change a huge amount. I'm really interested in looking at Limerick. They had a very, very successful game plan that was clearly evident in the league of 2018, and then went on and won an All-Ireland. But I think that game plan was found out a little bit this year by a very good Kenny tackling game plan. So what are Limerick going to do? And look, we spoke about the league earlier on. This is where this is hugely important. Limerick are going, you could be out of the Munster Championship after 2 matches, so you don't have time to road test your method of hurling or your game plan if you're going to go with a new one. And Limerick went very much, it was very, very, very easy to see what they were doing, in the sense they had, nearly 3 half-forwards who were really wing backs, coming back the field with great athletic ability then to come back up and support the attack on that. But obviously Kilkenny completely turned that on its head by a really, really good breaking down the play, breaking down their game plan in the Limerick defence, turning over the ball and actually scoring. And to me, that's the key metric of playing. If you can do enough turnovers and then be creative and score, well, look, that you're really well on the road at that stage. I know Limerick could have very well have drawn at the end. I know they weren't far away. But I think that
obviously that ravenous tackling and getting turnovers works well with Limerick, who tried to play it out from the back.
Yes, correct.
Right, because if you launch that, you're bypassing, but Limerick wouldn't do that. So Kilkenny got that spot on,
and that was a fierce change from Limerick. I mean, that wasn't Limerick's way. Limerick's way was to hit the ball long prior to that. So is there, I think Limerick might have to go with something else, something slightly different, just to bring something new to the table. People will have this figured out now, how to flood the middle third, break down the possession game when out of the defence and that. But actually, when you do that, what type of player then are you going to play in your half-forward line? Is that going to be creative, quick forward that, of course he's going to have to tackle back the field, but maybe not as back as far as Gerard Hegarty and Kyle Hayes have. So I think Limerick probably have a little bit of work to do here to look at the maybe tweaking their method of play a little bit, because I think maybe some people might have cottoned on to it at this stage. And number 2, if they do, well then what type of players fit into that then? And that is, quite difficult man management. We spoke about this a while ago. So, if Gerard Hegarty doesn't fit into that, is he now challenging for a wing back spot or a midfield spot or something like that? I'm just, I suppose,
you're just
throwing that out
Yeah.
there. Exactly.
But that's the thing, why Limerick works so well is that the opposition's centre half back will hold back, so he'll be covering Gallan and Casey and Flanagan and all these lads. But Limerick worked it to a certain point where the ball they gave in was always bypassing him. If you hit it from too far back, and it's the most frustrating thing you'll ever see in hurling, you're landing it onto the spare man and he's putting it back up on top. So for Limerick to change to a long ball, you're right, they'll have to keep more of their half-forward line in position, and that changes everything. So do they need to rip up a script though, Cheddar? Because look at it, it was the bloody a deflection of a 65 that might have got them a draw, and this was against a Kilkenny team out for blood.
No, I don't think to do, Willie, and I'd be amazed if John did that, but I don't think they need to maybe change things around a little bit, not make it as obvious about how they set up and how they play the game. I think they came into 2018 with a really defined game plan, very, very clear about what they were going to do. But the crucial part about it is they had the key players and the right type of players in the right places to actually play it. If you change that around, are those players still adept at playing that game, and with quickness and I'd probably say at the minute I'd question that. And if I was to use just some examples of that, in the All-Ireland they had plenty of chances of scoring, but those forwards weren't the clinical forwards that maybe Gillan and Graham are. So are you going to see maybe a more a Graham, Mulcahy, Gillan type forward in it, or rather than the primary possession winners, mobility players that we actually saw on the team? I don't know. I'm just sort of throwing that out.
It does depend on a philosophy too, because you see managers like Guardiola or Klopp, to use a soccer analogy, and Guardiola could get turned over playing out from the back and his goal scored against him, and he goes, look, well, that's obviously a risk we take, and my philosophy is to play out from the back, and like it might be Kylie and Kinnerk's decision. This is the hurling we believe in. It didn't work last year. We're not going to start. This is the style of play that we believe, in, and it depends whether they want to continue on.
That's a really good point. And I suppose that's the sort of point I'm making, Wooly. Well, certainly if they do that, they need to protect possession an awful lot better than they did last year, because teams are going to come gunning for them with a really, really good tackling plan. And that'll be probably two-man tackle. You'll see full forward lines actually forsaking full forwards and going out to the half-back line just to put in a real high, intense tackling game. And you just need to turn you over a few times, and then the team sort of asking themselves, should we just knock it long now and belt it? And of course, that's exactly what the opposition wants you to do. But I do take your point. So what went wrong that day? Well, they gave away possession too easily, and they weren't clinical in front of the goals. They had plenty of chances to win the match outside of that last strike. So they may very well say that. They may very well say, well, look, we just didn't execute properly here, and our percentage completion of passing and that wasn't to the level that we normally are. Because I think that's what you're saying. That's what Guardiola would say. Look, this is the way we play. We play possession game. We do not give the ball away. So if they don't have it, they can't do anything with it. And maybe we don't have those other type of players anyway. Those incisive, clinical, quick forwards that can that can score. The John McGrath type forward, I suppose I'm talking about, that with 4 or 5 chances he's going to score 4 points from very, very little room. If you don't have those, well then there's no point in trying to do something different.
It's definitely interesting. It was a very interesting stat I read today. It was in the Limerick Leader. They tried 29 players already in that Munster League, and that's without 8 players that played last year's championship. So if you were to add the 8 that probably will be on the panel again, they're up using 37 players already. 29 without those 8.
That's interesting, because
so it's a lot. So it's a wonder, is he going, like, he's definitely getting a look at lads now, whether he wants to. I like to look at Nash as a wing back. Like, I mean, I don't see, it's hard to get in wing back on that team because they're so bloody good.
Yeah, no, there's definitely purpose to that, I would think. Looking at what John and the Limerick management team did in 2017 and 2018 particularly during the league, they definitely had a clear idea. And you were talking about Shane earlier on, a clear vision about where the team should go and the personalities that they had to fill the positions. And they just kept rehearsing that and probably tweaking it every day and just getting it right. And I would think that they have a very, very clear vision about the number of players that they think have the ability to step up here and step into the positions that they want to play in.
When is Liam Sheedy going to start trusting these young fellas? Because to be fair, last year he gave them.
Well, I think I know Liam. Liam trusts these players. That's not an issue. The issue is, are these players better than the players he has at the minute?
Yeah.
And he is a fantastic judge of that. That's what makes Liam probably his greatest attribute.
We all know the year after that although Limerick didn't shake it up. Now they didn't win an All-Ireland. To win an All-Ireland the year after, something has to be shaken up. Is that fair to say?
No, I think that's just cliched stuff, Wooly. I don't think so. There's no reason why the same team can't go along and get a little bit better even and win it again with the very, very same team.
It doesn't happen often. Kilkenny, even Cody always changed someone. He changed 1 or 2, kind of went by the wayside, and someone came in.
I think that's not a bad idea to have one player coming in, but that's for a different reason. That's for sustaining performance over a long number of years. If you just said, look, my objective this year is to win the All-Ireland again, and I don't really give a damn what happens to that or what happens to my county after that, that's a different objective. But I don't subscribe to that, Wooly. Now, you might want to create little conditions like that in the team to keep people sharp and to keep people hungry and all of those things. But if the 15 that played last year in the training right up to the game are still playing the best and are the best in the county, well, look, you'd be fairly silly not to play them again if that's what they're proving. You know, once they prove it, they've got to justify it. I'm not saying that you're living on last year's performance. You're living on the performance that you were seeing in the training field. And look, Brian has said that hundreds of times, and sometimes we don't just listen enough to what he's saying. And that's what I think makes Liam very good as well. He trusts what he sees in front of him, and he makes the decisions based on the performance in front of him. And I don't know any better way than that.
No, and what it is, but it's the same with every year when the team that wins the All-Ireland. You think, geez, where would anyone get into that team? Like, you look at the Tipperary team other than Bonner, and like Bonnie, O'Mara would be very hard done by now, and Dan McCormick's the other wing. Like, I mean, Bonner nearly has to start, but like, you'd be very harsh on O'Mara, who's outstanding, which would look like the fella who would probably lose out to Bonner if he was coming back in.
I suppose that just backs up my point, Willie, really. So you think of how O'Mara is, or any of the other half hours there, and I know that Bonner's after breaking himself to get himself into the condition to go for this team and win his jersey back. What are you going to do? Let him give it to him? So that's the real hunger and the real aggression that you need in the dressing room. It's built on honesty, of course, and trust and all of those things, and real camaraderie within the team. But it's also built on that type of, look, it's animal stuff, really. That's what you're looking for. And if you have that in the dressing room, my God, it's a fantastic place to be. And it needs to be genuine. You can't just make that up. Players see through that pretty quickly. If you're just putting somebody in there and you're dropping somebody, and you know in your heart and soul that this guy wouldn't lace your boots. No, it doesn't work like that. I think we all know that. But I think, you just use Tipperary as the example. Bonner coming in there, knowing who he is and what he is, and he's going to break himself or break somebody to get that jersey back. So you can't rest on your oars either.
Yeah, no, exactly. Right, we'll come back and we'll preview the league in general after the break. Okay, so we'll do some predictions, Cheddar. I know you get very excited about predictions. You're going to tell me that you don't want to predict anything. I'm nearly sure. Well, I have predictions, and Brian Carroll has predictions. Are very similar, actually. And I didn't copy Brian's. They were there before that, right? So I'll give you me and Brian's prediction for Division 1A first. So finalists and winner. So we have Galway and Limerick to top. So the new system here, there's no quarterfinals. So it's the top two in 1A and the top two in 1B playing semi-finals. So Brian and myself have gone for Galway and Limerick to come out of 1A, and we both actually, funnily enough, have Dublin and Wexford to come out of 1B, and then the final to be between Wexford and Limerick, and he has Wexford to win the final and I have Limerick. So I don't know, can you follow all? We'll go into predictions before we mention. But what was similar with both is Wexford to have a good league, Cheddar, and like, I mean, looking from the outside, they do look like they're going to maybe push on with Andrew Shore is back. They have a few players in from the footballers. I don't know what they're like as hurlers. Maybe you know more than me. Michael Furlong, Kevin O'Grady, Michael Dwyer. I'm not sure. They didn't play again in the final of the Walsh Cup, any of them. I don't know if they're any good, but they'd be good squad players. Andrew Shore is definitely someone who could start. So they definitely look like they're on that trajectory, and we know Davy wants to win every game.
Yeah, I'd agree with Galway and Limerick. Actually, they're probably the two teams. And look, we've just said earlier on, like, there's an awful lot of variables here. This, you could change based on what you're seeing and based in terms of injuries and fit players and all of that. And I'd probably go with Wexford and Kilkenny on the other side.
Even Kilkenny being they'll be without the Ballyhale lads for another couple of rounds, won't they?
No, they will. But they're just getting to the All Ireland and setting your goals out for next year, and I think Brian will see the league as being important to him this year, just to stay going, and he'll want to take down Wexford as well. I think it's interesting, Wooly, because it probably contradicts our argument a little bit earlier on. You take Wexford. Clearly, Davy has went out to win matches with Wexford and to take down big teams. Yeah. And we all know that it's one way of building self-belief and confidence in that. If you beat one of the teams above you fairly regular, you have no fear of them after that. You actually want them. You want to take them on. I think that's Davy's attitude to Wexford at the minute, and I would suggest that it needs to be the attitude of Dublin as well. Dublin needs to consistently start beating some of these teams to put themselves in the starting line for winning an All Ireland and that.
Davy savours it though, doesn't he? wants those big things. It's actually interesting, would you believe, I saw him, this is just Davy Fitzgerald, and this is what makes him great. Like, this is just a small thing, but it was after beating Galway in the Walsh Cup, they came back and got a late 1-1. So they beat them in Moore Park. And he says, I'm not looking forward to coming here next Saturday night. I'm 100% not looking forward to it. So he's ramming this home. I saw a few of them taking notes there. Now, whoever Eddie sent, or maybe it was Eddie himself, I saw a few of them taking notes there. So to be well into getting ready for next week. I know what's coming, and I've told the lads we have to be ready for it. We've got to be ready for a battle next week. So he's in the dressing room after winning the Walsh Cup, telling them, now whether he saw Laois lads there or not, he's telling his players, you know what I mean? He has them primed already to go, these lads are out for us already.
I'd say most managers would probably say the same thing, though. You know, you mightn't just hear about it, will he? You know, I'd be amazed if Shane, or I'd be absolutely amazed if Liam Cahill wasn't in the same situation as Davy, that he didn't say broadly the same thing. You know, you need to keep everybody sharp here. Why
would Davy say it publicly then?
Look, sometimes you might. You know, I would be surprised if Davy hasn't thought that through, to be honest with you, because he might say it publicly because the talk around Wexford, and as a friend of mine says, around the kitchen table might very well be, you know, you're going to get 2 pints up there. So that may very well be aimed at supporters or something like that. You know, it's unlikely that Davy would have just thrown something out as a soundbite and something like that. You know, I would think he would have thought through beforehand, regardless of how the game went. That, you know, his focus really was on the following Saturday night. It was great to win, of course, but his focus was really on the following Saturday night, and to keep everybody sharp, mentally sharp here, not fall into a sort of a lull about, you know, a game that they're going to play. Yeah,
they have Matthew Hanlon and Laois Chin. This is good news for Laois. They're going to be out for the weekend, and Diarmuid O'Keefe is only back from travelling, so he's not fully right either. So, like, I mean, Laois got them at home when missing a few of their bigger players. You know, Laois would be looking at that thinking that, you know, they have an outside chance of getting a result.
I don't know anybody in Laois that would think they have an outside chance. You're going ball headed for these matches. But anyway, no, Laois have a very, very good record against Wexford over the years. Not necessarily beating them, but certainly in performance. And that, I'm, you know, going way back here. And, you know, some teams, you know, if Laois play Tip or play Kilkenny or maybe play Cork, look, they've been so successful over the years. There's probably a psychological gap there about it, but that's not there with Wexford, and it's not there with Dublin. You know, as was shown last year. So I think it'll be quite a tight game, and I think Laois will miss Charlie Dwyer in terms of, you know, winning primary possession and that sort of ball off the floor and that. But I don't think there's going to be much in that, and you know, Davy's right here. You know, don't arrive undercooked to a game like this and expect then after 5 minutes, you know, Shavers, we're in the middle of a war here, we need to switch it on. It doesn't work like that. You need to come in properly prepared for that. But I don't think there's going to be a huge amount in that. I'm you know, born really about that there really is no fear of Wexford from Laois playing them.
Yeah, to Clare, none of us have tipped Clare. Peter Duggan's away travelling, who's a big loss. They play both Wexford and Kilkenny away, so the draw hasn't been kind to Clare, I suppose, in that division.
They have a good history in the league, though, going way back. And, you know, I think Brian will be targeting that. You know, Brian will have a different way of managing, and you know, there'll be a lot of new things come into the team here. And he'll probably want to test players, you know, do you really have it in the stomach here to go to war for me, and that type of thing. You know, I think Clare will be fired up. Brian will have Clare fired up. I think there's no doubt about that. So, you know, again, it depends where teams are. You know, if they're playing, for example, Kenny at the right time, there's going to be very little between them, and they're missing maybe 6 or 7 of what you might think is their first team. And, you know, if TJ is missing his captain of their team this year, probably one of the finest players we've ever seen, and without him last Sunday, I'm not so sure that Ballyhale might have won without him. That's how important he is. So if you're missing a couple of key players like that, and I know Clare are a good team, they've an All-Ireland in the bag in 2013, not that terribly long ago, you know, that could tip it going the other way. So Clare, I think Clare have certainly one of these teams that have a point to prove.
You mentioned Kilkenny there, and it's interesting that Colin Fennelly said it's an amazing. This is Kilkenny won the senior, intermediate, and the junior hurling at the weekend, and he said it's an amazing achievement. It shows Kilkenny is on the way back, which was an interesting thing. Colin is accepting they were gone. A lot of people put Kilkenny away last year. They said we don't have a hope, and we got to an All-Ireland final, and now you have 3 club teams winning All-Irelands. Killian Buckley was at a media launch of the National Leagues, and he said something similar. Is there a kind of a feel-good factor around Kilkenny? I made the point here on the show, and I don't want to go on about it, but I didn't make it to you, is that Kilkenny will always do well at intermediate and junior levels because they've only 12 senior teams. So Tullaroan are number 13 in Kilkenny, and they're not playing number 13 necessarily, in Cork. And it makes for a brilliant championship in Kilkenny with 12 teams. Kerry has the same in football, and the number 13 Temple No in Kerry could play the number 25 in Dublin because Dublin have two 16s. You're not comparing like with like.
Look, that may be the case at intermediate and at junior level, but it's still an incredible achievement to win the 3 of them in 1 year. I think even if Tip won that or Cork won that, just you'd be sort of saying that's fair going. I think Colin was gilding it a little bit there, Wooly, to be honest with you, and that. No hurling person ever doubts Kilkenny. They've had the critical bits in place, I suppose, to ensure continued success, going back as far as I can remember. They've a high volume of technically gifted players. They have incredible spirit. They have a real sense of purpose about them. And they've sort of an undying spirit. I mean, I suppose Anthony Daly captured it really well in a media article there during the week, that they just simply do not know defeat. They will never give in. So that's always been in place. And if you look back at some of the technical players, I'm going back a little bit here. If you look back 60s, 70s, Seamus Clear, Eddie Kerr, move it on a little bit to Joe Hennessy, move it on a little bit to Billy Fitz, move it on a little bit even to the TJs, DJs, Henry Shefflin, Owen Larkin, some of the most fantastic, skillful players. And allied to that, you've had some fairly tough men in the sense of the Nicky Yars and Pat Hendersons and Ger Hendersons and Jackie and Brian Hogan and Noel Hickey and that. You wouldn't sort of pull a mean stroke around them lads, or you'd know all about it. So they've had all of those things in place for so long. So I think I just think, and I can tell you, there's an awful lot of more quality players to come here as well. You look what Kieran's are doing over the last couple of years. So I think Colin might have been gilding a little bit there. They're in an All-Ireland last year, and rightly so. They deserve to be there, and they're not going to be too far away this year either. And I think if they get them all together and just get, I think Brian probably just needs a little bit of time to blend the team and get all the players in the right positions in that. Look, they were in an All-Ireland, Wooly, so I don't think anybody ever underestimates Kilkenny, and if you did, you'd be a fairly foolish person. What
about Shane Walsh? What do you make of him? He's after doing some scoring for Tullaroan on the way to that All-Ireland and in the final as well. Like, I mean, we know from his speech he's clearly a bit of a character. Like, I mean, has he got the ability to get in there?
Yes, he has. I suppose I go back to something, Wooly. I suppose maybe it's a business term, culture eats strategy and that type of stuff. The culture in Kilkenny is always spot on about that thing, and nobody epitomises that better than the Walshes, I would think. Tommy epitomises what it is to hurl for Kilkenny, and look, Shane's hardly going to miss out on a bit of that around the kitchen table or anything like that. So he has real pace about him, good finish, really hard worker. He has all the attributes I suppose that Brian likes in that type of player. But there's a raft of those type of players in Kilkenny that could step up at any time and just grab a Kilkenny jersey and go on and win an All-Ireland. And they've proved that over the years. You remember going back with Wally when he came onto an All-Ireland team, it came from nowhere and was man of the match. What other county could actually do that? There's not too many around anyway.
Didn't Jerry Aylward come out of nowhere and win an All-Star in his very first year too, when nobody really knew about him at all? Just quickly, we'll give Waterford a mention here, Cheddar, because like I mentioned, I quite like the sounds of Liam Cahill. He's got a tough job though, there's no doubt about that. Brick retired. Noel Connors and Maurice Sheridan have been dropped. Philip O'Mahony is retired at 28. Shane Bennett's not committing again this year. That's a fair whack of your established players, isn't it? And we know, like, what the amazing thing about Waterford is they had that exceptional minor and under 21 team. Yeah. And all the players came off that. They've exhausted them. Like, there's no more of them. Like, and they do need new players. We know Desi Hutchinson has come in. Shane Fives came back this year. He's played already in the Munster League. At least they're 2 back. Jake Dillon's back.
Yeah.
So they're compensating a little bit, but instead of just compensating for fellas that are gone, you'd like to be adding to it, wouldn't you?
I suppose that just goes back to the point we were talking about earlier on about players taking time out and that, Willie. But I do think Waterford have enough players. I think like Liam has a team ready to go. I think that's important. I think they've got experience. They've got a hunger to get going again. I think he's been sort of lucky in the sense that Pádraig took over the team last year, and that transition has happened, I suppose, from Derek McGrath. So the transition has happened as such, and he's lucky to come in and have that year, has passed.
The only
such.
way is up now rather than taking
Correct.
over from Derek. So
Correct.
it's an easier job
It's
than
an
Fanning.
easier job. I think there's no doubt about that. But on the other side of that, so I suppose there's no waiting in Waterford. We're good to go. But the other side of that is there is an expectation in Waterford that there's a quality crop of players there, and we need to maximise that and get something out of it in the next couple of years. And I think if that's the feeling within the players, well, then Liam is in a good place. If that's what he's generated, that real hunger to go away now and let's do something and win some things here while we're still able, then he's in a good place.
Yeah, so he seems to have something like the 2 All-Irelands he won with Tip. They were underdogs against very fancy Cork teams.
But it's hard to read that, Willie. That's under 21. Or under 20, under 21. It's just difficult to read that at different times. But you're right. In both of them, they were the underdog on both of them, and he did come out on top.
Some managers quite like that, don't they? Like being over the underdog and taking on a big. But maybe it depends on what you're used to.
I think in any sport, it's if you were asked in any sport. Whether you're a player, whether you're a manager or whatever, being the underdog is a good place to be. You're fighting against everybody and so on. It's a good psychological position for a dressing room to be in.
That's why they all make themselves underdogs before matches.
But provided that gap's not too big. If there's a psychological gap there that you're afraid of going out, then you're underdog. You're not really the underdog at all. You're a dead dog. But I think Liam is in a little bit of a tricky position that the first 2 matches are tough for him. So I think he needs to get his team right very early and get the system of play and whatever way that is going to be, and get, as I said earlier on, get the right players in the right place and have the right backup players to be able to step in if somebody's not doing the job, and that he probably needs to get that right fairly early. So I think the league is important to Liam. Okay,
so you have Galway and Limerick coming out of one, and then you have Wexford and Kilkenny coming out of the other one. Who do you have in the final then, and who do you have to win it?
Not just because I'm doing some work there, but I just think that Kilkenny, if they can get over those first couple of games without the Ballyhale players, without the Tullaroan players, and without the Fitz players,
that's a fair whack though, Cheddar. I wouldn't be tipping Kilkenny on that basis. Do you know what I mean? Because of how many lads they're going to be missing.
Yes, until. Yes, if the culture was different in the county.
But it affected them badly last year. They were in a relegation playoff last year, missing all the Ballyhale lads.
I agree with you, it does. But I just, I think they've new players coming in that certainly Kilkenny certainly have a huge amount of quality players. Whether to be able to step in there and just, make a statement and grab the jersey or not, I think they will. They're all a year more mature. They were very, very young last year, some of them. I think they're more mature now, and they sort of, know they got to an All-Ireland and they know what's there for them. And I think if Brian gets over the first couple of games, I wouldn't tip against them, Willie, now, to be honest with you.
Okay, right, just to finish up quickly then, we have 2B. So look, you'd imagine it's going to be between Offaly, Kerry and Antrim to come out of this one.
Yes, no, it has to be. And look, it's a risky, a tricky one. I think it's a tricky one for Michael Fennelly. Because Kerry will not give anything away easily, or Antrim. I know they beat Antrim in the cup there recently, but there was very, very little in it. I'm not too sure now if that game is in Antrim or if it's in Tullamore. But you go up to Ballycastle to play Antrim. It's a very, very difficult place to come out of and win, and I know that myself. So it's not as clear cut and as clean cut as you would think that Offaly would get through that and get back up again. It's not going to be as easy as that. And it goes back a lot to is everybody in Offaly going to really get in behind the team now? Because a lot of the time, this is what sort of happens. It happens in everywhere. It happens in business and everything. There's a whole absolute pile of literature about the race to the bottom in business, and when you go there, it's probably over for you. There's no way of recovering. And what happens really is there's a huge amount of pessimism around the county, and there's an awful lot of people pulling away and energy suckers in a county. And you know, you might win a couple of games and you might get rid of it, but you lose a game against a team that the counties expect you to win, and then it might turn the other way. So there's a little bit of risk here for Michael, and he needs to start to get this early, build confidence within the team, get the best players in the field, obviously, get the team to buy into what you're doing. That is absolutely top of the tree. I'm sure it will be with the people that's involved, and then get the county behind you. I think when you have that momentum, then you can move places. But just to get off the ground at the start with that is not easy.
Not easy. Joe Bergen's retired as well. I don't think Shane Dooley's available, so they were two of their big scorers the whole way. So
but I would think they're willing that
should be enough to win that, though, right?
They should, and I think that they would have had needed to look at new players anyway. I mean, you have Oisin Kelly, you have some players coming through an awfully, Liam Langton, you have some young players there in Offaly that are quite gifted as well. You just need them all. That's the issue really in Offaly.
Yeah, okay, great stuff, Cheddar. Right, that's all we've time for. We'll be back on Monday and we'll review the games that were on television, and we'll be back on Thursday for the next preview show then after that. Right, we'll talk to you then. Good luck.